a famous poet of ours, singer, songwriter, Gilles Vigneault, was about to turn 90 years old a few years ago, and he turned to a 103-year-old woman and asked her about her secret of longevity. And she replied, "Don't forget to breathe." There's no question that breathing defines our being alive, yet we do it 23,000 times on average per day without even being aware of it. Given the challenges faced by organizations and the difficulty of sustaining continuous improvement on a daily basis, then the question becomes, what's the organizational equivalent of breathing? So, introducing Toyota Kata. It all started with the publication of this book by Mike Rother, late 2009. Mike is an American researcher. Mike is also famous for having published Learning to See 10 years earlier in 1999, which basically gave birth to VSM, value stream mapping. Going back to Toyota Kata, the original book, what's interesting is its subtitle, Managing People for Improvement, Adaptiveness, and Superior Results. So it's not about tools and techniques and complicated calculations. It's about developing people to grow into becoming better scientific thinker and becoming better at problem solving. A few years later, 2017, Mike and Gerg Ollinger published Toyota Kata Culture, and Mike, a year later, published the famous Toyota Kata Practice Guide. Then Jeff Liker published his second edition in 2020 of the famous Toyota Way, which emphasized this edition is a major rewrite from the first 2004 edition. And this edition emphasizes Kata and scientific thinking. Jeff also co-authored this book, magnific graphic novel, Lean in High Variability in Business. This is the story of Zingerman's mail order over an almost 20-year journey. So it's their lean journey. And the last part of that book focuses on Kata, which was a game changer. You've got also the Toyota Kata Memory Jogger, co-authored by Thilo Schwartz and Jean-Marc and Marc-Olivier Legentil, so a German-Quebec combination. And as mentioned, I published this book last July, Bringing Scientific Thinking to Life, an introduction to Toyota Kata for next generation business leaders and those who want to be. Over and above these books, two coming books this year, Thilo Schwartz and Jeffrey Liker will publish in May this novel on Kata coaching, giving wings to our team, and Engaging the Team will be published later this year. So we're talking about Kata. Most of you are familiar with Kata through martial arts. So Kata is a routine that we practice in order to learn a skill. Through ongoing practice, the routine of Kata becomes second nature to the body, executed with little conscious attention, and is easily accessible. So cycling, driving a car, typing, reading are a few examples. Experienced drivers do not consciously think about controlling the vehicle. They simply focus on the road, which was not the case when you learned how to drive. Most of us were overwhelmed the first few hours behind the wheel because we had so many things to account for. And with time, basically, these became routine practices, and now we can focus on the road. So we're talking not just about Kata, but about Toyota Kata. So Toyota has been a fascinating organization to learn from. We've been studying Toyota since the 1980s and the 90s. And out of these studies came what is now known as the Lean Toolbox, a number of tools that organizations have tried to adopt and adapt over the years to their organizations. Unfortunately, very few organizations have been able to reach the level of success reached by Toyota and sustained it. Don't get me wrong, tools are important, but limiting ourselves to adopting and adapting these tools is not sufficient. We're confusing correlation with causation. So as Mike Rother says, we've been trying to add Toyota Production System practices and principles on top of our existing management thinking and practice without adjusting that thinking and practice. Toyota's techniques will not work properly, will not generate continuous improvement and adaptation without Toyota's underlying logic, which lies beyond our view. In other words, trying to adopt and adapt these practices to our organization, it's like trying to plant a seed in a soil that is not ready for it to grow. So the tools, in other words, are the visible part of Lean. Mike tried to pay attention to less visible stuff that might explain better than tools the success of Toyota. So Mike looked beyond the tools and studied what Toyota managers teach their people and how they do it. A common denominator in their teaching was learning to iteratively improve actual processes day by day with procedural feedback coming from the coach, in this case, which is the manager. So this is Kata. You can see Toyota's results, tools, practices, and principles above water, and underneath two overarching routines called the Improvement Kata and the Coaching Kata. The Improvement Kata, a systematic and scientific way of thinking and acting, and Coaching Kata, managers as coaches teaching this way of thinking and acting. So thanks to Gemma Jones for this graph. In other words, success is not always what you see. So Toyota Kata is not a method to implement, but rather a practice methodology to utilize to help organizations that don't yet have seasoned scientific thinking coaching managers like Toyota does, change their culture to a culture of continuous improvement. Toyota is a means for developing scientific thinking skills and mindset rather than a tool or a solution to be implemented. We're emphasizing that Kata is a practice methodology. Think about cooking. You can't cook or you can't learn to cook by just reading cookbooks. At one point, you have to practice. And that's the whole idea. Here, the recipe serves as a training ground to learn how to cook. So Kata is the combination of two things: scientific thinking pattern, PDCA or PDSA, plan, do, check, act, plan, do, study, adjust. A special type of coaching that we call deliberate practice, and the two combined together, making scientific thinking a skill that can be learned by anyone. So more on the improvement Kata. Again, a systematic scientific way of thinking and acting. This is a four-step process. First, you have to understand the direction or challenge. What challenge are you striving to meet? Then grasp the current condition where you are now. So what is the process's current pattern of work? Then establish a short-term objective that we called the next target condition. What pattern do you want to have next? And then experiment toward the target condition. The step-by-step discovery process between where you are and where you want to be next, addressing obstacles that are preventing you from reaching that target condition. So the challenge pulls the organizations towards increased performance. It is set by top management. This is what you have to do. This is something very important and usually established over a 6 to 12 month horizon. It can also be a personal challenge. Then, step 2, grasp the current condition. So based on facts and data, what is the current pattern of work? What are the process metrics and outcome metrics? Then establish the next target condition. This is the desired pattern of work with the corresponding process metrics and outcome metrics established over a shorter time horizon, 1 to 3 weeks. In this case, going back to the lean tools, in this case, many lean tools can be viewed as target conditions to strive for rather than as solutions to be implemented. So this is a connection we can make with the traditional lean tools. Fourth step, conduct experiments, address obstacles that are preventing you from reaching your target condition. Kata helps you focus on those obstacles and on one obstacle at a time. Take, for example, playing golf in Canada in fall season. Once your ball reached the green, you won't start sweeping the whole green, picking up all the leaves that are waste, obstacles, or problems. You will focus on those that are obstructing the ball's trajectory to the hole. So that's the idea, focusing on those important obstacles that are preventing you from reaching your target condition. And then you will, as I said, experiment. An experiment, in this case, is a step taken with the intent of learning something. It's generate progressively greater understanding of a reality that is never completely visible to us. It's not an experiment if you know it's going to work. As you conduct experiments, and as you can see, this is not a straight line. You do experiment and you learn. The results are not always what you expect them to be, but there's always learning involved. As you experiment your way forward, the threshold of knowledge moves. Your understanding increases. So it's all about learning. Every experiment has expectations, and then you reflect on what actually happened. So the difference between what you expect and what actually happened is learning. So the question is not, will I succeed, but rather, what should I attempt? In this view, you never lose. You either win or learn. Also, Kata emphasizes daily continuous improvement, taking small steps at a time. Few words about coaching Kata now. So managers as coaches teaching this way of thinking and acting. The coaching Kata is a script to check the learner's mindset to hear what they are learning. The coach's role is to teach the pattern of the improvement Kata to the learner. It's not to achieve the results. So the coaching cycle usually takes place in front of a storyboard, and it's typically a 15-ish minute cycle. So the coach, usually the manager, meet the learner in front of a storyboard, which is a giant A3, more or less. So on this storyboard, you'll have the focus process, the challenge, target condition with outcome metrics and process metrics, the current condition, again, with outcome metrics and process metrics, and also information about the pattern of work, usually using block diagrams. Then you have the obstacle parking lot and the experimenting PDCA record. So the coach will go through a script, which is the 5 coaching kata questions, which is a starter kata, which is a way to get you going into this practice routine. This is not a straight jacket, but this is a way to get you started. So those questions are aligned with the improvement kata. So the first question, what is the target condition, is linked to step 3 of the improvement kata. Sometimes there's a question 0, what is the challenge, linked to step 1. Then what is the actual condition now, or what is the current condition, the equivalent of step 2. Then reflecting on the last step taken. What did you plan as your last step? What did you expect? Again, always a hypothesis of what you expect to happen taking that step. What actually happened and what did you learn? Then going back to question 3, what obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching the target condition? Which one are you addressing now? So focusing on one obstacle. What is your next step? What do you expect? Always a hypothesis. And how quickly can we go and see what we've learned from taking that step? Ideally, we're talking about daily coaching cycles. So practicing the starter kata, and starter kata are practice routines to begin with, help you develop new thinking by introducing new behaviors. So perhaps the idea for today's presentation comes from reflecting on one of Mike's comments during Kata Country Kata Geek meetup in 2017. At one point of his presentation, Mike said, perhaps kata can disappear. This is how I reacted at the time. Actually, when Mike says perhaps kata can disappear, he's talking about the kata artifacts. He's talking about the starter kata. So yes, perhaps the artifacts can at one point disappear. For years, we've been focusing our attention on the tools and practices at Toyota. What Mike uncovered and modeled was the less visible stuff, a systematic, scientific way of thinking and acting, and manager teaching their people this way of thinking and acting. So light and shadow. And what Mike did is difficult. Indeed, as researchers on routine theory have shown, as routine becomes more practiced and familiar, it becomes easier to do, but harder to verbalize or explain. So you can't just ask a seasoned Toyota leaders to explain what he or she does. They can't. So he observed those over many years to model this behavior and adapt this model to organizations that don't have the history of Toyota. During his research, Mike observed how Toyota managers coach their employee to do A3s. What Mike noticed is that outside Toyota, it was rare someone was coached with that rigor when working on an A3 report. Without the strong culture and expertise inside Toyota, he asked, how can we get people to follow a similarly rigorous process for practicing and being socialized into the routines for improvement. So the way real experts in Toyota coach you through A3 is similar to the improvement and coaching kata. And this methodology became known as Toyota Kata. And out of this came the improvement and coaching kata. And a few years later, Mike proposed a series of 7 starter kata for the learner and the coach. With that in mind, let's try to model a path towards developing a culture of daily continuous improvement and scientific thinking in organizations outside of Toyota. First, as mentioned early, for 5 to 6 years, Mike did some action research trying to answer those 2 questions. What are the unseen managerial routines and thinking that lie behind Toyota's success and with continuous improvement and adaptation? And how can other companies develop similar routines and thinking in their organization? This led to the publication of the original book, followed by the 2 other books, as mentioned before. Then, with the Startercata, any organization can start practicing Toyota Kata and learn. And with time, an organization will develop its own way of using visible artifacts like the storyboard and the 5-question card, or not. So the temporary nature of the starter kata raises the question about what characterizes success with Toyota Kata. Unlike efforts to implement lean tools and techniques, when you practice Toyota Kata correctly and successfully, the practice artifacts may well disappear over time. For instance, what Marc-Olivier Legentil, my former graduate student, witnessed in the 2 organizations he studied for his master's thesis was less about Toyota Kata artifacts and more about mindset, values, and beliefs. How people behave, the way they interact, the word they use, and so on. So, when could those starter kata artifacts disappear? Well, the question might not be when, but rather where. Indeed, Beth Carrington mentioned the question might not be when, but rather where. Perhaps we should keep the conversation more formal or structured when we coach in front of the storyboard, and less so during the rest of the day as we meet with employees and so on. Indeed, once embraced, Toyota Kata can manifest itself in encounters throughout the day. At this stage, Toyota Kata becomes like background music, not too loud, but always present. Embedding learning questions in the day-to-day conversation. As a manager, as a leader, someone reach out to you so you can engage the conversation with questions similar to the pattern of the 5 coaching questions. So what problem are you trying to solve? What do you plan to do? What is your next step? What do you expect? Very, very important question, because we are trying to interiorize, embed scientific thinking. So what do you expect? What is your hypothesis associated with taking that step? And then what happened and what have we learned from that? In conclusion, so we began asking this question: what's the organizational equivalent of breathing scientific thinking? As mentioned, the 2nd edition of Jeff Fleiker's Toyota Way stresses the importance of scientific thinking. This is at the center of his 4P model: philosophy, process, people, and partners, and problem solving. Moreover, Jeff Liker mentions that too many people think about lean as a mechanistic process of applying off-the-shelf solutions to an organization's problems. This is decidedly unscientific. Compared to these, implementing an event-based approach to continuous improvement, Toyota Kata is squarely about skill-building application practice through daily improvement that's aligned with the organization's strategic objectives. The only way Jeff Liker knows how to make lean sustainable is to make scientific thinking a habit. Even more interestingly, Toyota Kata is coached by line managers, not staff at all levels of the organization. So the model is managers as coaches and the workplace as the training ground. The changing role of managers in the 21st century. This kind of manager develops teamwork at high level and a group culture that involves pointing in a direction rather than the manager being the problem solver and telling people what to do. It's about coaching instead of directing to develop leaders instead of followers. Thus, the importance for managers, for leaders to model the right behavior. So yes, perhaps Kata can disappear. Startercata are a kind of scaffolding, a temporary structure to support something until it can stand on its own, that assists you in your team in growing scientific thinking capability. But the need for coaching never completely disappears. But what is Kata? So this is Kata pointing to the storyboard and the artifacts. No, Kata is in here. We're talking about scientific thinking. So to conclude and to paraphrase Disney, it's not the magic that makes it work. It's the way we work and think that makes it magic. Thank you.